Hello, Oakland Unified School District students, and welcome to Dimond Park. Dimond Park is found right here in the heart of Oakland, and it's a great place to visit and explore. My name is Eric Havel, and I work with the Community Resources for Science, an organization that creates fun and engaging experiences for students and teachers all over Oakland. And so this is one of my favorite parks, and we're going to explore trees today, which I love. So come on, let's go. In this short 10-minute video, we're going to explore two of the wonderful trees that we can find right here in this park. I love trees, so we're going to get started walking and exploring. First off, I want to show you a number of trees here that are right at the front of the park that are beautiful trees, and they're all different kinds of trees. So we're going to start here though with this one right in front of us. And I'm going to show you some techniques, and I'd like to get your ideas as well about how we can discover more about trees. As a scientist, some of the first questions that come to mind are the following. How did all these trees end up in this park? Are they all the same, or are they different? What tools and techniques do scientists use to help them identify trees? What do you notice about this tree? What do you wonder? Take a moment to write down a few of your thoughts in your science notebook. As a scientist, a few of the questions that come to my mind are, what kind of tree is this? What features of the tree might help me identify it? Take another moment to write down a list of the things that you think might help you identify this tree. Did you come up with any of these? The leaves, the bark, the cones, the seeds, or maybe the overall size and shape of the tree? Let's start with the first one on the list. Those are all great ideas. It turns out that using the shape, size, and color of a tree's leaves is a great technique that scientists use to help identify trees. Let's see if we can find a leaf. Here are some. Here's a close-up of one on the tree. But being respectful of nature, let's take a leaf that's already fallen to the ground so we don't do any harm to the tree. Here's a leaf. It looks similar to the one we just looked at. And here's another one. Down here, I've got our supplies that would be great if you could bring with you on the hike. A notebook or a pad of paper, some blank white paper with a pencil, a magnifying glass, and if you've got some crayons, that's going to help us out with our first activity. Okay, now that you've had a chance to think about this tree a little bit, let's do an activity that's one of my favorite things to do, which will help us learn a little bit more about the tree. Now, remember, we're trying to figure out what kind of tree this is. So I'd like you to think a little bit about what features of the tree you might use to help you identify it. Maybe, and go ahead and jot something down in your journal, by the way. All right, did you think about the idea of using one of the leaves of the tree as a way to identify it? That turns out to be a great technique for identification of trees. Making a leaf rubbing is really simple. So we're going to make a rubbing of this leaf that I just identified a few minutes ago. And when you're making a rubbing, look carefully at the leaf, because you'll notice that one side is fairly smooth and one side has a lot of texture or veining on it. So let's get the rubbing from this side, because it'll give us a little more definition and make a better print. So we're going to take our piece of paper, fold it in half, because we're actually going to do two rubbings, one at this tree and one at a second tree. And then I'm going to slip my leaf inside the paper, and I'm going to take my crayon with no paper on it and just simply rub over the top of the textured side of the leaf. And that's all there is to it. Now we have a great model, or a great sort of documented version of what the leaf looks like. Okay, now that we're done with our rubbing, we're going to make our way to a second tree. And as we're walking the path towards our second tree that we're going to explore, think a little bit more about that leaf that you took a rubbing of. And the reason we took the rubbing was because we're trying to think about ways we can identify trees, and leaves are one way. But certainly, I'm sure you can think of other features of a tree that would help us to identify it. So go ahead and look back at your journal and look at what you wrote. What did you come up with? What other features of a tree did you think of that would help us to identify it? So now we're making our way towards this very tall tree, which you can see in front of us here in the video. And as we get closer, we'll get a better look at it. What do you notice about this tree? What do you wonder? Go ahead and write down some ideas in your journal. From your journal and our earlier list, let's also consider the cones. Here are a few cones from the second tree. The size and shape of the cones can also be used to help identify the tree. And inside of the cones is where you find the seeds. In fact, here's a seed that's fallen out of one of the cones. This can also be useful to help us figure out what kind of tree we're looking at. So let's look at this tree from the bottom all the way up towards the top. Anything you notice about this tree? How is it different from the last tree that we looked at? How is it similar? Write some ideas down in your journal. Let's get a little closer look at the leaves on this tree, because we're going to take a second rubbing. And it turns out that these are not actually called leaves, they're referred to as needles. So let me go find one that we can take a rubbing of somewhere here on the ground. There's a good one. Let's get a rubbing of that. Let's start making our second rubbing. Since I saved space on the paper I used for the first one, I'm going to take the second rubbing on the same piece. And then this is what we're going to take the second rubbing of, the needles of this tree. So remember, we're going to put it inside. And what I've found is that if you keep it somewhat flat and not too bumpy, it'll make a good rubbing. So we're going to put it inside the paper. You can use your finger to feel where the specimen is. And then I find rubbing lightly seems to work pretty well. You can start by getting the overall imprint and then try and get some of those needles on your rubbing. Okay, that looks pretty good. You can see the needles there and the stem. That should do it. Now we're ready to start identifying these trees. I'm going to start with the second tree. To do this, I'd like to introduce you to a tool called a dichotomous key. There are many kinds of dichotomous keys, both in hard copy and online versions. We're going to use an online version that's focused on trees found in the Pacific Northwest. It can be found on the website of Oregon State University. I'll share the web address at the end of this video. Okay, let's get started with the dichotomous key. Here's the home page at the website at Oregon State University. So the first question is this tree a conifer or a broadleaf tree? Well, it turns out it has needles, so it's a conifer. So I'm going to click here. And then that's going to take me to the next question. Does the tree have needles? Are they needle-like or are they flattened and scale-like? Well, I would say they're kind of needle-like. So let's click here. All right, now the question is, are the needles clustered or not clustered? Well, I think it looks more like this picture on the right. All right, are the needles short and sharp or are they longer than 1/2 of an inch? These look a little bit longer than 1/2 an inch, so let's click here. All right, are there any tiny pegs on the twigs or the stem? I don't think so. There's looks like some little pointy things, but I wouldn't call those pegs. So let's go here. Are the buds large and pointed or not large and pointed? I would say those aren't very big. Those buds look pretty small. Are the buds clustered or not clustered? Well, I only see one bud. Clustered means more than one, so let's go with not clustered. All right, are the needles white underneath? Let's see. Well, here's the top side. Here's the underneath side. Yeah, I see some white there. All right, and are the needles pointed or are they blunt? They're definitely pointed. They're in fact a little bit sharp. So it looks like we have a redwood tree. We did it. We won't have time to do the second tree, so I'd like to encourage you to use the dichotomous key to identify the first tree we visited in this video. I'd also like to encourage you to visit Dimond Park and see if you can find your own tree to identify. While taking rubbings is a great way to document the leaf and needles that you've observed, consider also taking photos of your specimens so that you have them available to reference when you use the dichotomous key. Thanks so much for taking time to watch this video. Until next time, happy exploring!